The morning felt heavy, long before the sun had fully risen. The air in the small town of Willow Creek was thick with a kind of worry that seeps right into your bones. For the Carter family, their world had been shattered overnight. Their home, once filled with the laughter of their 8-year-old son, Ethan, was now cloaked in a silence so deep it was almost unbearable. Ethan had vanished 2 days ago. One moment, he was in the backyard with his best friend, Max, the family's loyal German shepherd. The next, he was gone as if swallowed by the earth itself. The police had searched the woods, neighbors had combed the fields, and volunteers had called his name until their voices went hoarse. But there was no sign of Ethan, not a single footprint, not a single clue. Just the lingering echo of his laughter, haunting every corner of their home. Inside, Ethan's mother, Sarah, sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. His father, Mark, paced the living room, phone glued to his hand, waiting for news that never seemed to arrive. While the world outside moved on, time inside the Carter home had stopped cold. Only Max seemed to have any sense of purpose. The big German shepherd, usually so gentle and playful, had become restless. He paced the house constantly, his nose pressed to the floor, ears pricked at every single sound. He'd sit by the back door for hours, staring out into the yard, as if willing Ethan to just reappear. And every morning, as the first light crept through the windows, Max would do something strange, something that would soon become the key to a mystery that would shake the entire town. On the third morning after Ethan's disappearance, Sarah was jolted from a restless sleep by a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, she dismissed it as a branch against the window, or maybe just the wind. But the sound grew more insistent, tap, 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 steady and deliberate. She pulled herself out of bed and followed the sound down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. And there, at the living room window, stood Max. His big paws were pressed against the glass, his eyes fixed on something outside. He looked back at Sarah, then tapped the window again, tap, 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 never breaking eye contact. It was as if he was trying to tell her something incredibly urgent. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She slid the window open and Max immediately darted outside, pausing only to look back at her, as if begging her to follow. Mark, awakened by the commotion, joined her at the door. Together, they watched as Max trotted across the yard, nose to the ground, his tail stiff with determination. "Do you think he's found something?" Mark whispered, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. Sarah could only nod, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and desperate hope. She grabbed her coat and stepped into the cold morning air. Max was waiting at the edge of the yard, looking back at them, his eyes shining with a strange intensity. And so began the journey that would lead the Carters to a truth more shocking than anything they could have imagined. It was a journey that started with a simple tap on a window, and would end with a revelation that would leave them and the entire town forever changed. What did Max know, and where was he leading them? Stay with us as we uncover the rest of this incredible story. As Sarah and Mark hurried after Max, the world around them seemed to blur. The familiar path through their backyard, once a place of laughter and games, now felt foreign and ominous. Max led them with unwavering focus, his nose skimming the ground, his body tense with purpose. They followed him past the old oak tree where Ethan had built his treehouse, past the swing set that still swayed gently in the morning breeze. Every step was a reminder of their missing son, every shadow a possible clue. The woods at the edge of their property loomed ahead, dark and silent. Max paused at the tree line, glancing back at Sarah and Mark, as if to make sure they were still with him. Then, with a low whine, he plunged into the underbrush, his tail disappearing into the shadows. Sarah hesitated, fear clawing at her chest, but Mark took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We have to trust him," he whispered. The woods were thick with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Branches scratched at their arms, and the ground was uneven beneath their feet. Max moved quickly, weaving through the trees with a confidence that seemed almost supernatural. He stopped occasionally, sniffing the air, then continued on, always moving deeper into the forest. As they walked, Sarah's mind raced with memories. She remembered the day they brought Max home, a tiny, wriggling puppy with oversized paws and soulful eyes. Ethan had begged for a dog for years, promising to take care of him, to love him forever. From the moment they met, Ethan and Max were inseparable. They'd played together, slept together, even ate together. Max was more than a pet. He was family. But now, with Ethan gone, Max seemed lost until now. It was as if he had found a new purpose, a mission only he could understand. After what felt like hours, Max stopped abruptly. He stood at the base of a large, twisted tree, his nose pressed to the ground. He began to dig furiously, sending clumps of dirt flying. Sarah and Mark rushed to his side, their hearts in their throats. "Max, what is it?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Max paused, looking up at them with pleading eyes. Then he resumed digging, more frantic than before. Mark knelt beside him, brushing away the dirt with his hands. Suddenly, his fingers closed around something cold and hard. He pulled it from the earth, a small blue toy car. Ethan's favorite. Sarah gasped, tears streaming down her face. She clutched the toy to her chest, her body racked with sobs. Max whined softly, pressing his head against her leg. Mark wrapped his arms around Sarah, holding her as she wept. For a moment, the world stood still. The toy was a sign, a message from Ethan, or perhaps a clue to where he had gone. But as they looked around, there was no other sign of their son. The woods were silent, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Max sat back on his haunches, his eyes never leaving the tree. He looked at Sarah, then at the tree, then back at Sarah, as if urging her to look closer. Sarah wiped her tears and stood, approaching the tree. She ran her hands over the rough bark, searching for anything out of place. Her fingers brushed against a small, carved heart E+M, etched into the wood. Ethan and Max. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She traced the letters with her fingertip, her heart aching with longing. "Ethan was here," she whispered. Mark joined her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "But where did he go?" Max whined again, pawing at the ground. He looked up at the tree, then back at the path they had come from. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more. Sarah and Mark exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. There was more to this mystery, something deeper that Max was desperately trying to show them. With hope rekindled by their discovery, they turned and followed the clever dog back through the woods. Max didn't lead them back toward the house. Instead, he veered off in a completely new direction, pulling them deeper and deeper into the heart of the forest. As they walked, the morning sun climbed higher, stretching long, skeletal shadows across the ground. The woods grew thick and dense around them, and the air turned noticeably colder. Sarah shivered, pulling her thin coat tighter around her shoulders, but Max pressed onward, completely undeterred. He moved with a palpable sense of urgency, as if he knew they were racing against a ticking clock. After what felt like an eternity, the dense trees finally gave way, and they emerged into a small, forgotten clearing. In the very center stood an old, abandoned cabin, its windows like dark, empty eyes staring back at them. Max raced to the door and stopped, pawing anxiously at the weathered wood, his tail wagging in a frantic, nervous rhythm. Sarah and Mark approached cautiously, their hearts pounding a frantic drumbeat against their ribs. "Do you think?" Sarah whispered, her voice trailing off, unable to finish the thought. Mark just nodded, his face pale and set. "We have to look." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and pushed open the door. The hinges shrieked in protest, the sound echoing loudly in the suffocating silence of the woods. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. Thin slivers of sunlight pushed through cracks in the walls, painting eerie, shifting patterns on the floorboards. Without hesitation, Max darted inside, his nose glued to the ground, sniffing frantically. He scoured the single room before coming to a sudden halt at a small makeshift bed tucked away in the corner. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat, a choked gasp escaping her lips. There, lying on the dusty blanket, was Ethan's bright red baseball cap, the same one he never went anywhere without. They were close. They were finally close. What secrets does this cabin hold, and will they find Ethan before it's too late? Make sure you resubscribe so you don't miss the next part of this incredible story. Thanks for watching. Sarah rushed to the bed, her hands trembling as she picked up the cap. It was dirty, worn, but unmistakably Ethan's. She pressed it to her chest, her tears falling freely. "Ethan!" She called out, her voice echoing through the empty, silent cabin. There was no answer. Mark frantically searched the room, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, for any sign of their son. Max, their loyal dog, sniffed around the bed and then darted to the window, his ears perked up. Suddenly, Max started barking. It wasn't just a normal bark. It was loud, urgent, insistent. He jumped up, planting his paws on the windowsill, barking at something just beyond the glass. Sarah and Mark's hearts pounded as they rushed to the window. Peering out, they saw it. At the edge of the clearing, a small figure emerged from the dense woods. It was Ethan. He was dirty, tired, and his clothes were torn, but he was alive. Sarah screamed his name, a cry of pure relief, tears streaming down her face. She burst out of the cabin door, running as fast as she could across the clearing, with Mark right behind her. Ethan saw them and broke into a run, stumbling through the tall grass. He threw himself into his mother's arms, sobbing with relief. "Mom! Dad! I'm so sorry I got lost. I tried to find my way back, but I couldn't. I was so scared." Sarah held him tight, her heart overflowing with a gratitude so immense it hurt. Mark knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around his son. Max bounded over, barking joyfully and licking Ethan's face. Ethan actually laughed through his tears, hugging Max tightly. "You found me, Max! You found me!" Sarah looked at their amazing dog, her eyes filled with awe. "You saved him," she whispered. "You saved our boy!" Mark nodded, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how you did it, Max, but you're a hero." The family clung to each other, a tangle of arms and tears, savoring the miracle of being together again. But as they finally prepared to leave the creepy cabin behind, Ethan stopped, his face suddenly pale. "Wait," he said, his voice trembling. "There's something else." Sarah and Mark exchanged a worried look. "What now?" Ethan led them to the back of the cabin, to a small trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of old, dusty blankets. "I heard noises down there at night," Ethan whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "I think someone else is here." Mark's protective instincts took over. He carefully lifted the trapdoor and aimed his flashlight into the darkness below. The beam of light revealed a narrow staircase leading down into a dark, cramped cellar. Max let out a low growl, his body tense. Taking a deep breath, Mark descended the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. What was he about to find? At the very bottom, he found a small, makeshift room. It was mostly empty, save for a few scattered belongings left behind, but it was the wall that made his blood run cold. Scratched into the rough wood were dozens and dozens of names. Children's names. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. Ethan, still terrified, clung to her leg, his eyes wide and unblinking. Mark scanned the names, a chilling dread washing over him. Some were old, faded with time, barely visible in the dim light. Others were fresh, carved with what must have been desperate, frantic hands. It was a horrifying realization. Their son's disappearance wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't some random accident. Someone had been using this cabin, this cellar, for years. Suddenly, Max barked sharply, his voice echoing up from the main floor of the cabin. The sound jolted Mark back to reality. He hurried back up the rickety stairs, his heart pounding against his ribs, and slammed the heavy trapdoor shut. The thud echoed through the small space. "We have to call the police," he said, his voice shaking, barely a whisper. "Right now." Sarah nodded, clutching Ethan so tightly to her chest, as if she could shield him from the evil they had just uncovered. As they finally left the cabin and stepped back into the fading daylight, Max trotted ahead, leading the way. His head was held high, his tail giving a slight, confident wag. He had done more than just find Ethan and bring him back to his family. He had uncovered a dark, terrible secret that had lurked in the woods for years, a secret that would undoubtedly change this small town forever. The bravery of one loyal dog had brought a long-hidden nightmare into the light, and now justice could finally begin. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The days that followed were a wind of police activity, news reporters, and thankful neighbors. The cabin was thoroughly searched. Every name on that wall was carefully documented, and the small town of Willow Creek was finally forced to face a truth it had tried so hard to ignore. Ethan was finally safe, all because of his loyal dog Max. But the emotional scars from his terrifying ordeal, well, those would take time to heal. Sarah and Mark did everything they could think of to help their son recover. They held him close, listened to his deepest fears, and reminded him every single day just how much he was loved. And Max? He never left Ethan's side. Not for a moment. He slept right at the foot of his bed, followed him from room to room, and watched over him with this incredible, unwavering devotion. The town, of course, hailed Max as a true hero. The local newspaper ran a huge front-page story. German Shepherd saves missing boy, uncovers town's darkest secret. People from all over brought treats and new toys, and children lined up just to get a chance to pet the brave dog. But for the Carter family, the real, true miracle was simply having their son home again, safe and sound. One evening, as the sun began to set over Willow Creek, Sarah sat on the porch, just watching Ethan and Max play together in the yard. The sound of Ethan's laughter, a sound that had been missing for what felt like an eternity, was back, filling the air with a sense of hope. Mark came out and joined her, wrapping his arm gently around her shoulders. "We're so lucky," he said softly. Sarah just nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "We're blessed," she replied. As the first stars started to appear in the night sky, Sarah thought about everything they had just been through, the crippling fear, the gut-wrenching pain, the awful uncertainty. But she also thought about the love that had carried them through it all. The incredible bond between a boy and his dog, and the courage it took to keep hoping, even when all seemed completely lost. She looked over at Max, lying peacefully in the grass beside Ethan, his eyes watchful and wise. "Thank you, Max," she whispered into the evening air. "You brought our family back together," and in that quiet moment she knew, deep in her heart, that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because sometimes heroes come in the most unexpected forms: a loyal dog, a brave little boy, and a family that simply refuses to give up. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. And always remember, love, hope, and loyalty really can change the world one miracle at a time. Thanks for watching.